Hello, everybody. Our last speaker for today is Omkar Chandgadkar, a user experience professional based in Seattle by way of Austin, Ann Arbor, and Mumbai. Omkar is passionate about organizational culture, design operations, and UX frameworks, and he has played many roles in consumer and enterprise spaces as UX designer, researcher, manager, and design thinking facilitator. If you're a design leader building a new team without design ops support, this presentation will help you plan design intake and iteratively elevate design impact by reframing UX design as a product offering instead of a process. Omkar, stage is yours.
Thanks, Francis. Hey, everyone. Thank you for joining in today. I'm Omkar Chandgadkar, and I'm a senior UX designer at Amazon Alexa Smart Home and based out of Seattle. And as Francis said, I've hopped around in different roles in the design world. Today I'm going to be sharing some of those lessons learned with all of you. And I'll be talking about bootstrapping design operations, or as I like to call it, how to design a plane while flying it. So during this talk, I will explain how design leaders can do design operations when they don't have dedicated staff for design operations. So you might be an individual designer in a team that does not have design ops support, or you could be a manager that's trying to set up a new team. And here are some of the common challenges that I've heard from my colleagues and my mentees. So first two are really about being stuck in the big picture thinking without really being able to ship anything. It's kind of like being stuck in that blueprint. And if they do try to ship, most of their work gets scoped back and is never revisited. And it's as if the baggage just falls off on the runway. And the third one is kind of exact opposite, where teams are busy reacting to incoming asks and are often being involved at the end of that decision-making process. So in other words, it's like they're having to design a plane while flying it. So today I will be presenting two frameworks that designers can use themselves or managers can use to coach their design teams. So the first one can really help designers navigate and get unstuck when they find themselves being brought in at the end of the projects, or if they're stuck at the beginning of the project and want to ship their designs. And the second one can help designers and managers become proactive about how they support and maintain that healthy balance in supporting both tactical and strategic decisions for the organization. So let's start with the first framework. And when we get into this, let's think of how we think about design, right? We think about it in terms of these milestones as a sequence of an artifact similar to these. So you might have things like personas or some way to document your users and understand them and build empathy for them. You identify needs and problems for them. Then you kind of start sketching out what does the high-level solution look like. This might be a storyboard, this might be a sketch. Start fleshing out an information architecture, fleshing that out in terms of wireframes, and finally creating specs that are handed off to the engineering team. But at the same time, there is also product management that is also using its own set of milestones. So they are looking at the market and identifying what are the different market segments that they should target and why. They're looking at building up their principles and tenets and values around which products would be built. They're looking at identifying a product vision, and this could be a document, this could be a blue sky deck, it could be a different set of things. And then they're looking into creating launch goals and fleshing them out using business requirement documents, right? And at the same time, they're managing their backlog, grooming it regularly. And once the product is ready to launch, they're conducting these launch readiness assessments. So they have their own different set of decisions and milestones that they go through as well. And same with the engineering team. And I have just oversimplified this over here and applied the stuff that is relevant to some of the conversations that we're going to have today. So they are looking at the technical infrastructure. They are building out the tech architecture. They're exploring and doing some what-if explorations to see if something is feasible and scalable through what we call an agile spikes. And they're creating epics, stories, and executing against those using the sprint plan and finally launching the product. So there's a lot of decisions that are happening in parallel here. And stepping into design operations is really about realizing that you need to understand where these dots from different disciplines should intersect before moving to the next milestone. So you need to understand how artifacts across design, PM, and engineering to begin with are interconnected. So what are these points of intersection? And how do these artifacts inform each other? So this is a connecting the dots framework that I built that uses some of the most common artifacts and decision points that are used by design, product management, and development teams. And my first thing is for you to kind of like build that out for your organization to understand how those decisions are made. And no matter how your map looks like, it will always be looking at these questions on that map. So you have what areas can we invest in at the beginning? And this might be documented through a shared set of artifacts like customer journey maps or some documentation of the current state. And once you've identified that, the next question would be, well, what are the best ways to solve these problems? That might be a product vision, a North Star, or a blue sky vision, whatever your team might call it, right? And once you've identified the ideal state, then what do we solve first? And this might be defined through having a shared set of launch goals. It could be a document, it could be a slide deck. It might be different for our organization, but it's still trying to identify what do we solve first. And finally, what experiences are we shipping right now, right? And this is represented through sprint plans, through design specs, through wikis and whatnot, and like having launch readiness documents that are trying to identify the same thing. So the connecting the dot map will really help you identify how your organizations make decisions and how are those decisions interdependent. It might look completely different than what I have over here, but this is just an example of how that might look like, looking at the common artifacts and common decision points that are used in the industry. So let's go back to our situations. So the first two in which you're being stuck at the blueprint, or when you're trying to ship, the baggage just falls off the runway. How do we solve this problem using that framework? So I'm going to use an example here to walk through how the DOTS framework can help you. So let's say you want to build an autocorrect feature for your software product. So some sort of a feature for the word editor or some software product that you're building, but how do you build it? So let's say that you're here on the map. So in this case, you have created a vision, which means that you are at the beginning and somewhere in this ideal state. And hopefully you have aligned with your PM and engineering partners on this milestone. And the future remains unclear. The teams can't see how to ship this rather hefty vision. So at this point, according to the framework, the next step is really around breaking it down into the 2B processes, right? And into a roadmap. So having phases into epics and epics into stories. So this is a great time to proactively create those by having value-based roadmaps. So here's an example for the autocorrect feature, right? So the V1 could be something as simple as a dialog box that shows up when you click on a button and it tells you that, hey, there's a spelling mistake here, makes a suggestion, and you correct to confirm the spelling. In V2, there may be a spelling mistake that is like highlighted in red. And when you right click on it, it now suggests the correct spelling and you can click to confirm. And V3 is being super proactive, right? It's very close to your ideal state. So the correct spelling is suggested and applied even before you finish typing. So this is an example of how you can create a value-based roadmap. And it's really important to be proactive on that and breaking it down before it is scope-backed for you. So whenever you're in doubt about how to create that for your product, always think of analogous examples in the industry and see how they have evolved their product over time. So, all right, at this point, you have identified your phases, you have your phase one, and how can we use that to align with our partners on the launch goals, right? And that's something that you could use to do that. The next step is breaking it down. So at this point, you could perhaps break these launch goals into stories and be proactive about creating these stories with your PM partner. But so an example of that might be, all right, for sprint one, we have to create a spelling dialogue, have a correct all feature to correct all the reoccurring instances of that wrong spelling, having the ability to check grammar, having the ability to learn the spelling and then ignore the spelling. So let's say you have created all these different stories in your backlog, right? But at this point, maybe your existing backlog is already full. So how do you put this in your sprint plan? So really at this point, it's a great time to join backlog grooming meetings and start negotiating some of these with your PM partner. and see how can you bump up some of these stories? How can you push some of these some of the previous stories back, or maybe delete them because it's no longer relevant in light of your new vision? So the key here again is to be proactive by identifying what is the next decision point and how do you support it. So really that move from strategic to tactical for the first two situations, here are the lessons learned that I would like to share. First, leverage the upcoming dots on your map and identify the next set of decisions. Second, be proactive in breaking your designs down instead of your partners scoping them back for you. And finally, be proactive about tracking these pieces and merging them into the existing backlog. So that's the piece around being strategic, from being strategic to tactical. Now let's move to our second problem, or the third problem, which is designing a plane while flying it. And at this point, you're being involved in the last minute for specs that were needed yesterday. How do you really navigate in that situation? So let's use another scenario to explain this. In this case, let's say a product manager approached you saying that, hey, we need to have mocks for this user community feature or a groups-based feature that they want to build for an enterprise product. So think of that being similar to some kind of a groups or an online user community that you see on social media apps today. Well, that needs to be shipped this month, and that's quite a big ask. So the first step is figuring out where you are on that framework. So clearly you've been dropped over here. And the decisions before you got involved are kind of unclear. So at this point, it's important to note that this framework is not really a process diagram. It's a relationship map. It is showing you how different artifacts are interconnected. So you don't have to start from the beginning. You don't have to say that, hey, we need to go all the way at the front and like start making decisions. You just need to understand how previous decisions were made. And this could be as simple as having a 30-minute one-on-one with your PM partner. So let's use the PM example in this case. So the first step is understanding project goals. So how do you do that? Your question to them might be, hey, what are the goals for this launch? What are the KPIs? What are the measure of success? The second thing is understanding what the roadmap was. So you could ask things like, hey, how do you see this feature evolve? What is the vision for this feature? The previous decision before that was around the current context. So a question that you might ask could be, what are the main problems that you're trying to solve at this point? And finally, the understanding of the target market and the market point of view, you can ask questions like, hey, what is the target market segment here? And why are we going after it? And you can repeat the same process with your dev managers, with your UX researchers, and customizing these questions for them. And through these simple one-on-ones, you can retrace the steps and identify what decisions were made. And once you have these decisions, you have that context, you can start designing for the problem and not for the feature. And the key here is to design just a little bit more than what can fit the sprint. So in that way, you've created a backlog and you can get ahead of the development. So for example, over here for the groups feature, you could say that, hey, let's start out by creating private groups where you can only invite people from your existing company. And the next sprint item could be around building moderated groups where you can, let's say, invite your grad school friends into that user community. The next sprint could focus on public groups wherein anybody could be invited and anybody can ask to join. And then people can start creating profiles, and you can start reporting misuse because this is an online community now that is open for everyone. So you can start creating a little bit more and get ahead of development cycles. So in this case, I created 5 sprints worth of work. And at this point, you are already ahead of the engineering sprint. So you can use that time while they are busy building to step back and look at the roadmap and design for a few more sprints worth of work. So in this case, it could be sprint 6 could focus on moderators, public posts, deactivating accounts, being able to rate posts, and be able to follow members. So you can now start designing for the next set of things that are in the roadmap because you've created that surplus. And at this point, you are basically incrementally creating additional surplus and earning yourself more time. So while the engineering team is going and building stuff that is for sprint 6 and above, you are saved more time, and you can focus now on looking at the ideal state, right? Like take a step back from the roadmap to the ideal state and focus on the big picture. And you can spend more time on generative research and coming up with design proposals. And you can, at this point, you can start looking at some exciting pieces, right? Like discovering groups, or having the ability to suggest posts, or having suggested groups and like recommendations, having some of the posts redacted, and some of these advanced features. So now you are incrementally becoming strategic. So in summary, that move from tactical to strategic starts by retracing the steps that were previously taken to really understand the prior decisions. And second, you want to create that surplus by designing a little more than what an engineering sprint can handle. And that earns you time. And this can help you get strategically as you keep getting ahead of sprints and ahead of the engineering schedule. So we talked about the move from tactical to strategic and strategic to tactical for these specific projects. But sometimes, despite the best effort, you may fall into a rut, into a cycle, where teams are constantly designing for one small feature request after the next, because everything is urgent and important. And this might happen when you are in a design team that is spread across multiple product managers, right? You constantly are getting these feature requests for small things one after the other, and everything is important and urgent. Or you could be on the completely other end of the spectrum, where you're cycling again and again, building product visions, but not really being able to ship any of them. So how do we solve that systemic challenge, right? How do we, the DOT frameworks can help you navigate one-off individual projects, but how do we really balance the strategic with the tactical on a more regular and sustainable basis? So at this point, it is really important to take a step back and think about what value does design involvement bring in different stages of product development. And in this case, if we look at them connecting the dots framework that I have shown you, think about how can this relationship diagram be turned into a set of products. So here are three examples. First is a Horizons class project. And this could be a type of a project in which a design offering in which you can create a compelling vision for your business that they can aspire towards in the next X years. The second class of project could be a mountains project, in which you are creating an end-to-end design for a major product launch that is for this year. And the third category of project could be a plains class project, in which you are really optimizing experiences for an existing product to really improve the basic usability. So these are three different value propositions that design can bring, and each of the value propositions has been turned into a product offering that you're offering to your business. So at this point, just like a salesperson, you can market these design offerings. Instead of telling the PMs, telling your business that, hey, this is like a strict siloed process that we follow, twist that a little bit and say, hey, here's what we can offer. And this is an example of some of the brochures that I created for my design offerings that I started marketing to PMs and putting them in like project rooms. And so that everybody was aware of the offer, that the value that we bring in. So once you start marketing these design offerings and they start getting popular, you can actually start leveraging them during your design intake process, right? To identify what type of support do you want to put on a given project. So this is easy to do when you have a clear intake process defined, but maybe you don't have an intake process for design projects. And that's totally fine. You can just take a look at a product backlog and identify what are the next set of items and see how do you want to support those items. So the key here is to maintain that healthy balance, right? So even the plains projects are important. So here's how. So a Horizons class project can help you in terms of reinvigorating the backlog. It can help to do some what-if explorations. It can help building a compelling pitch that customers and product teams can really get excited about. On the other hand, a mountains class project can really help you launch products that are usable and useful. You can also then spend more time on the end-to-end customer experience and really hash out the edge cases over here. And a plains class project is also super helpful because it can help you refine and define some of the UX patterns and start updating some of these components. And Then the next thing that a planes project can build in is you can have quick fixes for some unimportant areas of the product or some of the areas that don't get attention. And finally, you can use that to really fix usability issues. So these different set of design offerings are all providing value to the business, and one is not less important than the other. The key is to maintain a healthy balance. And how do you do that? So every quarter you can start introspecting by looking at the distribution of your horizons, mountains, and plains projects to really assess the maturity of your organization. So you don't have to be, you don't really want to be skewed on the either end, right? You don't want to have too much of the horizons project or you don't want to have too much of the plains projects either. And when you are at that stage, you can now be intentional about identifying, hey, what kind of support should this project get? And especially focus on the areas where you have a deficit, right? So for example, if you're constantly getting a lot of project requests that are coming in at the last minute, perhaps you could say, hey, we have a lot of plains projects that are on our hand. And how about for these 3 projects, we don't support them for this V1 launch. We say that we're going to do a mountains project and help you for the next product launch for your product. Or you can look at a horizons projects and say, hey, you know what, we're actually going to look at turning this into a mountains project and focus more on launching it and having a first launch because we have a lot of horizons project in our charter. So in this way, you can really balance that and introspect on the distribution of strategic and tactical projects. So how do you use these frameworks, right? So the connecting the dot framework, it can be used as a reference point. So something that you could constantly keep perhaps on your bulletin board next to your desk to really use that as a reference to navigate projects and create project plans. You can also use it as a mechanism to identify gaps that were on the decisions that were previously made, right? So sometimes if you're brought in later, you can use that to say, hey, this decision should have been made, but looks like we didn't make that decision. So should we revisit it quickly, or what is the understanding here? And the second framework, the design offerings, that can be used as a vehicle to really educate your partners about how they can benefit from design. Instead of talking about design as a process with like clear checkpoints, what is the offering that it can bring to the business? The second way you can use it is as an intake mechanism. So you can use it to really balance your tactical and strategic projects by identifying that an offering against each item on your design project intake. So really in conclusion here, this is how you can really steer away by basically starting by connecting the dots on how decisions are made in your org, and use that dots framework to really be proactive about future decisions and illuminate your past decisions. The second thing that you can do is start identifying design offerings based on this mapping that you create, and use that for marketing design value and as an intake mechanism. And finally, you need to balance the distribution between your tactical and strategic projects by having a regular introspection mechanism. And that could be on a quarterly basis, that could be on a weekly or a bi-weekly basis as well. And that's how you can steer away from designing a plane while flying it and help it steer it towards the horizons. So thanks for listening. I hope this was helpful. Feel free to reach out to me on these channels on LinkedIn or Twitter if you have any questions and comments and thoughts. And until then, keep connecting the dots and happy flying.
Thank you, Omkar, and to all of our guests today, and to UXPIn for putting this all together for us. Unfortunately, Omkar won't be able to answer questions, but you can find him, like he said, on LinkedIn and Twitter. You can see his screen right now to ask your questions and continue the conversation. And with that, we're done. I hope you learned a lot and you're inspired, motivated, and have a few more tools now to keep pushing the value of design forward. Before you get back to your regularly scheduled day, make sure to fill out the survey and share your feedback with our speakers and the awesome team who put this together for us today. The survey will automatically open in the browser once you leave the conference. We'll also have these recordings available on UXPIN's YouTube channel. If you're interested in engaging in more design ops conversations, visit the UXPIn YouTube channel where these talks will be posted. Check out the Design Ops Assembly community or join me for the AIGA Design Ops Ed webinar series tomorrow and every last Wednesday at 12 p.m. Central Time USA, 6 p.m. in London, and 10:30 p.m. in Mumbai. If I don't see you there tomorrow or in the Assembly Slack, I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day and week, and please be excellent to each other and increase the value of design. Thank you. See you around.